Hi and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to look at an A4 plate. Sometimes I call it my yin yang plate or my power plate. Now for me the A4 plate is like a paperweight or an umbrella. You always in need of one on a rainy windy day and you don't know what to do without it when you don't have it. Now for me the A4 plate can start a new radionic revolution. It's something which is very seldom used by anybody, or those who use it are not using it to its full capacity. Now the A4 plate is just a normal standard A4 plate which is laminated with a white and black surface. That's the reason why I call it the yin yang plate, and it represents the same principles as yin and yang, light and dark, male and female, day and night, and so on. So let us explore all the different wonderful functions of this, and let's jump into some of the ideas. Now you can normally plug it in either into the input socket or output socket. It will depend on what you're going to do. For this instance, we're going to use the output socket because most of the work we're going to do will be on the output side of the instrument, which basically means that we now bypass or actually use the system to go out to a larger plate. Now in most cases, most people will use the A4 plate to stack witnesses on it. You can fill up the plate with witnesses as long as they don't touch each other, and we quite often use it when it's flu season and we want to treat all the friends and family throughout the flu season, and then we'll stack them all on a plate like this, and then we'll keep them on that for the whole winter to ensure that they don't get flu. That's one of the first and easiest ways to use it. You can obviously use the same plate to actually stack cards on it, so you can basically increase the amount of cards that you can utilize onto the instrument by stacking them out, and you can even make little heaps of them, of sort of like 5 cards per heap, and fill up the plate with cards which could be close to 50, I think, and then use it like that. But in that case you will put it into the input socket where you then uh, pull in the energy of the cards into your input system and then allow it to go to your output part of your instrument from there. That's one additional way that you can use it. But for me personally, I have 110 uses for it, and one of the ones that I'm using, which quite a few people don't even consider as being using, and this is a 5-liter container, and it contains the stain that I use to stain the material that I use for my boxes for my instruments. Now the beauty of this is I can now program or charge the stain that I'm using with the energy of healing, divine connection, divine light, and I've got a specific rate that I use for that, so I can actually now charge up the stain before I apply it to the wood, and then that means that my box has already been charged up with a very strong positive energy, and that's the way I'm using this as one of the of using it, if I can call it like that. I recently said to somebody who asked me about the A4 plate, there's 100 things that you can do with the A4 plate. Now, I stand correct to say that I think it's much more than that. Now, the samples I'm going to show you guys today is just a few of the options just to awaken the idea in your minds, and it can be applied in so many other ways in fields that I'm even myself haven't been exposed to. So just examples of things that I've been used before and been using on a daily basis. So please feel free to experiment and expand this in a field where you are an expert or comfortable within. Now the first one I want to do is the spinal one. This is one I basically use almost every day. Now, when you actually use the instrument and the A4 plate in this way, you will normally put the witness onto the input plate. And that's one of the only 2 reasons why you will put the witness onto the input plate is for this, and then the other one would be when you do an auto scan. Now the reason for placing the witness on the input plate is that you draw the energy of the person into the system and then release it onto the A4 plate. Now for this instance, I will normally use base 44, which I normally will use. I never use anything else. And I will use a pulse mode because I might use the system for a prolonged period of time, say 10 or 15 minutes or so. And the timing sequences that we have doesn't count for that. So I normally will use a pulse mode, which works for me quite well. And we will use the rate on this one, the spinal integrity. And the rate for that would be then 2, 3, 17, 31, and 41. I'll normally choose a fairly high energy level of around about 150. And in this instance, I'm going to use a CM, which is 778. And I'll then start the instrument so that I have a pulse mode going, which means that I'm now drawing the energy of the client on the input plate into my A4 plate, where I now can actually start working on this. And this is where the fun part comes into, where you actually interact with the system, because for all purposes, the spine that I have here would be a representation of the spine of the client on the input plate. And since my picture or my plate is then laminated, I can scan through it and find a stick on the plate. I can then just find where it sticks, which is basically on this point. And now my wife always say I do the voodoo thing. I will apply pressure to it as you would have normally do when a person is in front of you or lying on a bed and you're doing a normal manipulation. You can actually rub or press the area. I will normally just, for the sake of it, now do the whole spine to release all tension in the spine, like that. And you can basically do this until when you scan, you feel that there is no stick onto the plate or onto the spine for that matter. And at the same time, you can always work on, because you have the hips available, you can do a rate for hips and then do hip manipulation, especially in osteoarthritis and all those things. You can actually just work on that. So that's one of the options that you utilize when using this system, is that you can manipulate the spine. And the point is that the person don't need to be with you. He can be a million miles away and you can still readjust his spine without him present. And that's one of the most often used systems that I'm using. Then another example of that would be, for instance, if you want to do muscles, the same principle apply. You can apply a rate for muscle relax or muscle strain or muscle tension, and then work on specific muscles. You can even look up the rate for a specific muscle in a muscle group and then dial it up on the instrument and then use that to rub the tension or the pain out of muscles. Now, I normally say rub, but quite often I will tap it or use brute force to get things organized into the system. And this is another way of then relieving tension in muscles that exceeds the normal use of an instrument. Now, the answer to that would be that you can quite often just put it on the instrument, put a person on the output plate, and then just send him the remedy or the vibration of tensions in the muscle, or whatever the case may be. But the actual fact that the practitioner or you as a practitioner are actually applying the pressure to it is also then a physical intervention, which is far more powerful and potent than just sending the normal vibration as in a normal rate. It's far more powerful than that, and it's far more accurate and useful. Then another example that we quite often use would be for eyes, anything from tired eyes to cataracts, or for objects that's in the eye that can easily be rubbed out. It's almost like having an eraser, and you erase the cataracts, or you rejuvenate the eye by actually stimulating the muscles around the eye and get everything then sparky and working perfectly again. That's another way of using the A4 plate. Then another example would be something I think I quite often use or need, and that's a bit of a brain stimulation. Here you can actually use this to actually work on the pineal gland or even the brain part, especially when you have a whole day thinking and contemplating all sorts of things and you have brain fog like me. Then quite often just rubbing it stimulates it. Obviously you can or should have a rate for a brain hole or something like that on your instrument. And then obviously there's also a nice ganglion sitting up here that helps with insomnia. And quite often when I struggle to sleep at night, I'll use this to just tap it and stimulate it, and you find that you sleep quite sound and nicely after that. And that's another way of using the A4 plate. And then obviously you can actually work on any organ structure in the body. And we quite often will use organs like heart, lung, your digestive tract, your liver, and all the other organs that's overworked and under pressure. I quite often just give it a good massage. And as I say, I'm just taking shortcuts here, but you should actually add a rate for the different organs that you want to work on onto your instrument. And that's another way of using the plate. Then next, it's not only humans that benefit from this sort of treatment. You can actually use the same principle on animals, and you can use pressure on different structures and systems where there's a need, even spinal alignment, even especially on horses. They quite often have spinal issues. So you can always work on the spine in the same way that you would work on a human. And you can still use the rate for spinal integrity for that, because it works the same for animals as for humans. So that's another way of using the A4 plate. Okay, let's continue with another example. And that would be if you are using acupuncture or using acupressure for that matter, then you can actually use meridians and acupunctural points to manipulate and stimulate it in the same way as you would have done with acupuncture. Now, I quite often use a very thin layer of felt underneath my plate or underneath the picture, and then I actually insert actual needles into the points as with what you would have done in a normal acupuncture treatment. But you can also stimulate the points by just holding the point. If you take the lung meridian, which is this one, you can dial up the rate, which is 22, 34, 39, 43, and 44 onto your instrument. And then you can actually open up the channel of this meridian, or you can actually stimulate individual points by holding that, tapping the point. And that way you open up the pathway and energy flows through the system. So that's another way of using the A4 plate. It can also be utilized in the same sense of something else I'm using quite often, I find quite useful, and that's the ear acupuncture, where you can actually manipulate the organ structure based on within the ear structure. And that's also another beautiful way of working with this system. Now, the next one I'm using also quite often, and I found is extremely potent. I don't know how many people know about the assembly point. Now I've got a map of the assembly point, and it's got little blocks, so I can actually use either a rubbing method to find the direction of the deviation, or I can actually use my pendulum to determine which direction the deviation would be. And then what I will do is that if there's a deviation from the assembly point, which is supposed to be in the dead center point on your heart chakra, I will use the rate that I have for rebalancing and aligning the assembly point, which is 4. I can just dial it up quickly. 8, 12, 14, and then 18, which is then basically realign and adjust the assemble point so that it actually goes back to its original point and stimulate the whole system through the heart chakra. And that's also another way of using the A4 plate, which is an extremely nice one. And then obviously another example would be EFT, emotional freedom technique. My personal view is, or my personal point on this is that I really do not like to be in somebody's face, or tapping his face, and that's too close for comfort for me. So quite often I will use this, and then I can do the same thing by actually applying the tapping onto the the picture as I would have been doing on the person's body. I can tap the points. This can be used in the same principle as you would have done a normal EFT session, and by doing it over a distance, which means that your client don't even need to be in the same room as you, and you can actually then do a full EFT assessment or balance just by tapping the different points on the body. And that's another awesome way to actually deal with treating somebody with a certain modality. And then yet another function that we can use, something which is also something I'm using quite often, and that's to use it as a crystal grid. Oops. Like that, and you can either place something in the center, or you can use it in any other way from a crystal grid point of view that you want. And then you can use rates for balancing, healing, harmony, anything which is related to the gems that you are using. And that's also another way of then using the A4 plate as a crystal grid, sending it to somebody else. Another option to that would also then be to use it in something which a lot of people nowadays are really crazy about, and that's a peggotty board. I haven't yet made myself a copy to show you guys, but it can be used in the same way that you have a grid system and then apply the different pegs or buttons or whatever as the black spots onto a peggotty board. And then obviously another option to that would be to utilize it in a system like this, where you can then do all sorts of different activation systems, where you can activate the one I quite often use would be the Archangel Michael one, where you activate the intention and invite Archangel Michael into the energetic system, and then ask for him to bring you strength and protection and all of that. So that's another way of actually using the system, where you can do quite a different range of activations from the system. And that's another way of using the A4 plate. Another way of using the system is not as much in using it to treat or send energy to a person per se, but you can use it to actually energize or activate orgonite or any other substance for that matter. I normally use a similar plate that I've been using for many years to actually use while the orgonite is curing, during curing process. Then it will be sitting on a plate like this, and it will be then charged until the actual resin had cure, and then it's absorbed the energy, and the energy is then permanently into the system, absorb into the orgonite. And that's another way of then using the A4 plate. Now, as I said, this is just a few of the samples that I've been using myself, and there's 1,000,001 different ways that this can be used. And I think if you really put your mind to it, you'll find that there's really endless possibilities to this. And all I can do is to say I encourage each and every one of you to actually go and explore and see how you can use an A4 plate to its full potential. Now that brings me then to the end of this shortish / longish tutorial, and in the next tutorial, well, I'm not sure yet what I'm planning to do. I have a few ideas, and maybe if somebody have a specific idea that I want me to cover, then feel free to let me know, and then I can look into that for you. I hope to see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.